let's look at risk first, survival first, because nothing else matters. We don't survive. And like your marketing doesn't matter, your operations don't matter, your culture doesn't matter, your mindset doesn't matter if your business is dead.
Yeah.
Or if you, the entrepreneur, if the thing that makes you want to do stuff, if that energy's gone, then nothing else matters.
Went all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, won blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake eyes.
This podcast exists because of the team at CADCM. At CADCM, we make content creation enjoyable. We are on a mission to help leaders create content that will improve lives, content to be proud of, content that fosters community. We know through firsthand experience how content brings people together, and we love helping make that happen. We produce podcasts, short form videos, blog posts, and other written works, while also providing support in website development, social media management, and strategic planning. And we would be excited to help you. Visit cadcm.com to learn more, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I want to start, I don't always do this, but I want to get like basic for a second, because you have your book coming out. I believe it's coming out April 8th. Correct me if I'm wrong. Survival First. Real quick, what's that book about?
It's about risk and survival for small entrepreneurs. It's about asking the basic question, why do businesses die? Because most of us don't make it.
Yeah.
And those stories never really get told.
Yeah. You felt you had to tell this story. And on that, this journey, I think I heard you say maybe in 2020 is when the idea came, I want to start writing. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's now it's 2024, right?
Yes.
Because my dad's written 2 books. He's writing his 3rd. I've talked to a lot of different authors. I know writing's a lot, right? It's a journey. It's like, you're not just gonna, I know some people go through the motions perhaps, but listening to you, hearing you talk about things, like you're deep. And this must have been a journey to get to this. So like, what hit you to say, I need to write this book now?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons, like the surface reasons why. Like a book is great for professional marketing, or a book is something that sells, or a book opens up a lot of opportunities. And those are all true.
Yeah.
But the real answer is I just had to do it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. I kind of had that feeling that that's where this came to be, right? Like, I just like called to do it, and whatever that is. And it doesn't have to be spiritual, could be, right? But like you felt compelled.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a line I just saw recently, and you said this. There's a lot that you said that kind of hit me. And so you wrote, recognizing the drama in the ordinary. I think you were in Florence, Italy when you saw this.
Yeah.
I'm like, holy shit, man. Like, that's good stuff. Because there's a lot that we can do, right? That excites us. That's like, I don't know whether it's going surfing, jumping off a cliff or whatever. Like that's exciting times. It's adrenaline rush or whatever. But like reading your book, sitting on your couch, sitting in your backyard, going to a park, going for a walk, hanging out with your family. Like people can think like it's the ordinary things. It's the everyday stuff. Like travel's amazing. I love traveling, and I'll talk about that. But at the same time, like just having this conversation, like maybe I do this a good bit, but at the same time, like that's why I do it. Like it's exciting. It's puts me out of my comfort zone. I'm meeting fascinating people from all over the world, and I get to talk to them. But it's also like you feel nervous, but you feel energy, and it gets you prepared. And like I learn about different businesses and people. But like that line of recognizing the drama in the ordinary, man, talk about that.
So in the context of travel, I know for me, when I go somewhere, it's not even traveling. They're like pilgrimages for me. When I go somewhere, I want to fully dive into the history, the culture, the cuisine, the architecture, the art, everything. And it turns what might normally be to the average person from pretty city streets and nice buildings and nice things to this drama of this location, this square, is where all these amazing or horrific things happened, or that coffee shop is where this meeting happened, or the design of this building, why is it so special? And the food that they eat here, like, how is this not just calories that taste good? How is this an expression of land and the culture that's been here for forever?
Mm.
And there's so many ways to have a more high definition experience of reality. And then in the book, a lot of the stories I tell are of, a lot of them are just friends of mine, people who had businesses, and either some project didn't go well, or the business fell apart, or they fell apart, and they just never told their stories. But for them, it was an intense life experience that there's a lot to learn from. But even the person going through that experience, through like a massive meltdown or burnout or failed project, may not see it as a big deal, but it is a big deal, at least for them. And there's a lot to learn from ordinary people living ordinary lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just in London and Paris.
Mhm.
And I remember I went with my daughter, and she's been studying French since she's a little girl. So she's in high school now.
Mhm.
And this is like, this opportunity presented itself like, hey, let's go do this. I remember planning this trip and thinking ahead of like what this is going to look like. I like planning, like I like to know where I'm going to be, but at the same time, like I don't want to make reservations. Like I want to stumble across the restaurant and I want to be like, that looks like a place I want to go to. I don't care if there's reservations. Let's walk in. Let's see if we can get a table, that kind of thing. And that experience of just being there and exploring it, like I had started reading, like we're going to be in Paris. I was like, I want to read A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I want to know where he got his coffee. Then next thing you know, I'm walking down. I'm like, wait, that's the street that Gertrude Stein lived on. And that's where he went to go visit her. I'm like, that's just like to your point before, like that's where history happened. Like that's crazy. Or here's the restaurant that used to be that he used to go for dinner. And this is where this meal happened. And he wrote about it in his book. And it was like, it's not that long ago, but it's also history. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do the same thing with Anthony Bourdain. I've been following his footsteps for a very long time now. And even still, I'll go and research where he went, what he did.
Yeah.
And just to be able to sit in maybe like a bar or restaurant that I know he sat at, and almost transposing my spirit and his together for this little brief period of time is special to me, given what his work and creations, how they influenced me.
Yeah.
And like what I did in Berlin, I was walking through the streets over there, listening to William Shirer's books about like the Third Reich and his on the ground lived experience of being in Berlin in the 30s. So it was like traveling in two different places separated by almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And to me, it was so cool getting to experience one place in two ways at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the amazing thing with reading. If you can't get there, like as I've gotten more into reading, I feel like, and people say, well, you can travel and you can experience it. Like you really can enter this different place when you're reading, but then to do it like what you just talked about, to actually also visit it, to be there, to understand what that was like. Like for me, visiting Dachau and seeing what the concentration camp was like, or understanding like people lived in these countries. They were in France and they were taken from their home and they were taken to these places in the 1940s. Like it's not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
And there's these accounts of this stuff. And it also, I don't know, like, man, these people sacrificed a lot for us today. And I don't know if you talk about risk a lot. It's obviously on the title of your book, right? And the subtitle. I don't know, man. Like, there's a lot at stake in a lot of different things, but I don't know, like, does history help you to overcome risk? Or like, you see what I'm getting at perhaps?
Oh,
or
yeah.
what was that? Okay.
So the first three lines of the book are through darkness, light. And I'm a huge history fanatic. I love studying history. I actually stopped reading business books a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I spent most of these last 4 years writing a quote unquote business book. And I was reading history books most of the time, mostly very dark history.
Yeah.
And I think it's really useful and kind of entertaining in a morbid way, understanding.
Yeah, it's the stories, right?
Yeah, the darkness of history, of people of different times, to know that these things are possible. Most of the story of the 20th century is overwhelming darkness all over the world. How did we get there? What can we learn from, say, Berlin, which in the 20s was a vibrant, cultural, interesting place? Lots of problems, obviously. And how do we go from that to the 30s, to the 40s, to its absolute destruction? And then it's not even where the horror ends. Imagine your city split into two, and one becomes the West, one becomes the East. They go on totally different trajectories. And what could we learn from darkness? What could we learn about ourselves? How do we, as individuals, become the kinds of people that can commit atrocities? Like a lot of the people in the SS, for example, were school teachers, were educators, were smart, intellectual, well-educated people who are now in death squads. What the hell's going on? What can we learn about that?
Yeah.
And the book is the same thing in the sense of, let's look at risk first, survival first, because nothing else matters. We don't survive. And like your marketing doesn't matter, your operations don't matter, your culture doesn't matter, your mindset doesn't matter if your business is dead.
Yeah.
Or if you, the entrepreneur, if the thing that makes you want to do the stuff, if that energy's gone, then nothing else matters. And looking at survival first means looking at what threatens survival, which is risk. And then how do we take that reality and look at every slice of a business, from the world you don't control to the world you do control, that ultimately you. And that's what this book is. And it's not merely about risk and darkness, because we're not here merely to survive. We're entrepreneurs because there's a massive upside in terms of money and freedom and meaning that we can get. But what we're all doing here is holding this tension of risk and opportunity. And how do we navigate that? How do we avoid the traps that trap a lot of people and still position ourselves to reap a lot of the upsides of why we're doing all this?
Yeah. Do you think, say it's anybody, right? I was going to say kids today, they, there's this path that you go on. You go to school, you go to college, you come out, you get a job, get an apartment, right? We'll talk about that. You buy a house. Maybe you can't today because interest rates are too high and housing prices has gone crazy, whatever that might be. And there's these expectations, I think, of what's supposed to happen next. And then somewhere along the line, we just stop taking risks. I've heard more people are being freelancers and entrepreneurs and gig economy, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm going to get a guaranteed salary if I go here. And, I think like, well, has that person ever been laid off before? Because the last I heard, and I have been laid off, guaranteed salary, there is no guarantee. They can terminate your job tomorrow. They can end your company. And you could have been doing an amazing job. It had nothing to do with you. And it could have been an outside influence. It could have been COVID. It could have been all these things. So there is risk. I know people are taking risks, but a lot of people are not. And like, where does that come to be? Like, you see what I'm getting at with being in school and going through the motions. And next thing you know, you're like 20 years into it. And you're like, man, now how do I get out of this?
Yeah. So it's not about taking risk or not taking risk.
Okay.
Because every decision we make where there's uncertainty there exists both risk and opportunity. Risk is just the potential bad stuff,
Okay.
and opportunity is just the potential good stuff when we make uncertain decisions. And it all goes to decisions. It's not necessarily managing risk, it's choosing risk. So you choose to get the salary, which means you're choosing those set of risks and opportunities where you see the opportunity as not just the stability of income, but the peace of mind of not having to scramble every month for income. But what you're also choosing, and the key is you may not be consciously choosing, is the risk of 20 years later, what have I done with my life? And what I advocate for is risk consciousness. It's okay, make that decision, get the job, get the salary, but be conscious of the risk you're choosing. And if you're okay with doing this thing that's going to potentially lead you to a place of what have I done with my life, go ahead, make that choice, but be conscious of it. If you're going to let one person control 100% of your income, do it consciously. Same thing if you're going to get into business, choose your risks consciously.
Yeah.
Everything we're doing is just this network of choices. And the best kinds of choices don't have guaranteed results, but they have asymmetric outcomes where the potential downside of a decision is manageable. It's not lethal, but the upside is super high.
Yeah.
So the logic of a ridiculous 4-year book project is asymmetry in the sense that what I put into this is going to have a lot of upsides for me for the rest of my life. And that's why I didn't rush the process, because I knew if this thing was going to be what I needed and wanted to be, then I have to make sure it's good, like really good. Because if I do make something really good, then for the rest of my life, I get to point to that thing that I made. It's really good. And there's asymmetric upside in terms of the money, the opportunities that open up. And what's been the most surprising upside has been the spiritual adventure that this thing has been for me. And even if it doesn't make me rich, if it doesn't open that many doors, just the journey I've gone through personally has been plenty of upside enough.
Yeah. It's been enlightening.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you just described that to me, it's not about taking risks or not taking risks. There's always risks like that. Again, I was saying it earlier. There's a lot of things that you've written or said that spoke to me and hit me and make me want to think and sit back on it. And I think that's very important for people, is to maybe develop self-awareness, to sit with it. I think you talked about having time and space. Because if you're moving so fast, like how could you possibly have this many deep thoughts or just any thought at all, because you're just going nonstop and you don't have time for time and space. So it sounds like that's what you enjoy doing, right? Like to have that.
Yeah, there's a word I like called flaneur. It's someone who walks around and just thinks a bunch. So during the pandemic, I just spent most of the days just walking around my neighborhood as the thought seeds of this book were beginning to sprout little roots and slowly begin to come together into this more cohesive network of thoughts. And this book was extremely difficult because there's so many just basic questions that I'm just going over, like what's a business model, or what's risk, or what's competition, and is it real, and why not? And it just took a lot of time for these ideas to kind of unfold, and a lot of time for my brain to just sit on these ideas until they kind of hatch, and these micro revelations would happen at random times during the day. And yeah, I don't say that the book took 4 years. It took the time it needed to take, which happened to be 4 years.
Yeah. You called yourself a post-grad dropout. So you went to Penn State.
Uh-huh.
You had this big vision that you're going to be in finance. You're going to get this amazing career, make a lot of money, all that good stuff. And then you found yourself in your parents' house again for 2 years, I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize, I'm like telling your story, right? But like, then you realize you're like, this isn't it. So I'm getting at is risk. Like, okay, you weren't taking risk at this point to some degree. You can tell me if that's incorrect as well. But then you say, no, it's time to make a move. And then you go to Austin, Texas. That's nowhere near Pennsylvania. I don't know where you lived at that point. Were you in Pennsylvania? And like, what is that? That's some serious risk to get off and go when you were not at all in that place. So
So I'm originally from Miami.
Okay.
And that's where I was living with my parents. And I had a pretty typical, like, upper middle class upbringing. My dad's an attorney, amazing at what he does. So lived in like a great neighborhood, went to the best schools, went to Penn State. And I was kind of on this semi-conscious, semi-unconscious path of do the right things, check the right boxes, go to the right schools, get the right degrees, get hired by the right companies. It's very like prestige oriented, status oriented. And it was kind of holding these two different energies at the same time, where I know I'm doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing. Like I'm getting the right degrees, I'm getting the right grades. But when it came time to come to reality and get jobs, I didn't. I spent 2 years getting rejected from every single job interview I ever did. And I could blame the economy or blah, 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 whatever. But the truth was I was self-sabotaging this experience entirely. I wasn't preparing well for the interviews. I wasn't really trying that hard. I was doing the bare minimal in that stage of like trying to get jobs and interviewing. Because the deeper part of me, the one that was banging on the door, was like, no, dude, this isn't it. Like everything was telling me don't do that, because the risk that I was connecting to, not even logically, but viscerally and psychically, was going down this life path and then hitting my 30s or 40s and being like, what the hell am I doing here? This isn't it. And I sensed that risk really early on. And it's also part of what I write about. Like, risk isn't this spreadsheet mathematical experience. I mean, it partially is, but it's this hybrid of what you think and what you feel. And it does become this sense. And at that time, I had this overwhelming sense that I was on the wrong path. And after some job interview that I had all the connections for and all like the layups, failing that job interview was just humiliating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not it. And I went home and I burned my college diplomas. Like, this is not the way anymore. And around that time, my senses were taking me to Austin. Just something I suspected about what was going on over here with the people, with the economy, with this vibrancy that was happening here. And I moved here with no job, like $1,500 in my bank account. And that was the best decision of my life at that point. And that was about 9 years ago. But that was this asymmetric upside, where my downside was spending 3-4 months in Austin, going broke and having to go back home. But the upside has been amazing.
Yeah. Was this a little bit, I mean, you had been to college in Pennsylvania, so you'd already left home, right? You left dad's house. You come back. Is this almost like Abraham's story of like, he's got to leave and he's got to go venture out on his own and see what he can make of himself at this point? I'm not saying you thought through that at that time, but yeah, like you just got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I had an experience earlier, like in high school, where I got to do this summer program at Carnegie Mellon. That was so amazing because I got to leave home and go off on my own and have all these adventures and experiences. And I'm like, yeah, I got to leave, got to go again.
Yeah.
So that's why leaving home was easy.
Okay.
But what wasn't easy was living at home after college and not having any money, getting rejected from all the job interviews, and watching all of my friends from the previous 2 years from my fraternity all get the kinds of jobs that I was applying for, and they were starting their lives. I was just like at the airport, just waiting for my flight to start boarding, and it was never boarding. So it was a deeply humiliating and humbling experience. It was like getting curb stomped by reality.
Yeah.
So all of this crystal palace of a worldview that I had just completely crumbled under me. And I chose to effectively hit the reset button and move forward as if I never went to college. So that's why I kind of thought of myself as a post-grad dropout.
Yeah. There's a lot of conversation right now about college, the cost of college, what happens after college, right? There's big topics going on. You burnt your college degree. I don't know what it means a lot, right? There's a lot of different things that we could take from that. But where do you stand on college right now? And like, what are your beliefs there?
More negative than positive.
Yeah.
Like, it was a fun experience. I had a great time.
Right. Yeah.
Like, a lot of my friends are from that time.
Right.
But if I had a kid, I would be like, probably not.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other things to get educated. Like, functionally, the signal that a college degree sends isn't what it used to be.
Right.
There's a lot of darkness in the university system right now as it comes to ideology. And speaking of where darkness comes from, a lot of it comes from hyper ideologically driven academics.
Yeah.
That's a different rabbit hole, but
the
Chinese Cultural Revolution is one great example. That's veering a bit far off. So, like, the signal it sends isn't what it used to be. Maybe if it's like an engineering or computer science degree, that's probably more useful. But there's just so many other paths out there that exist. There's traveling, there's working for people directly. Some of my close friends never went to college and they're fine. They're successful entrepreneurs.
Right.
I just didn't do it. I just did other things.
Yeah.
And I actually had to unlearn a lot of things I learned in business school. And I'm actually glad I went to business school, because going to business school helped me understand how useful business school wasn't. And I talk about this in the book, where so much of business school, it's so dehumanizing. It breaks everything into formulas and spreadsheets and jargon, because most of business school is oriented around getting you hired at publicly traded companies. And the reality of being a small entrepreneur, it's so much more of a human experience rather than this dry, bland, jargon-filled experience that it is in the big corporate world. And since so many more people are rebelling against that system, against that world, and doing their own thing, then the vocabulary needs to be different, the frames need to be different. so that they map to our reality. So that's why I actually spent a lot of time in the book building a new vocabulary of risk. This is why I don't use managing risk, I use choosing risk. And things like that. It's changing how we think about it by changing the words we use.
Yeah. What's the high school student to do, right? Because a lot of these schools, there's these expectations, I used that word before, of what the next step is. And kids, they have these thoughts like, maybe I take a gap year, maybe I don't go to college at all, maybe I do go to college, maybe I travel. Like, there's so many different options. And it's becoming more normalized to not go to school. And at some point, like, the cost just will be so astronomical. Like, people are like, I can't afford it, right? So, like, I don't think it's black and white to say don't go to college or go to college. Like, I think there's a lot of, like you said before, there's a lot of things that kids can do in college. Kids come from all over the world to come to the United States to go to university here. But it's confusing. You have social media, you have comparison, you have what school did you get into, would you not get into, the SAT, ACT, right? The list goes on. I mean, you mentioned engineering and math here in NC State. So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. NC State, now I think the numbers last year were 7 kids died by suicide. And most of them, from what I understand, were in the math or engineering department because the level of stress. And then you hear from schools, these kids come out. And, you know, if like you started 3 years ago, I mean, AI was a thing, but ChatGPT wasn't around, right? AI has advanced so much that when they graduate, they're already having to learn something. Now, maybe they have the core understanding of this. Anyway, man, that's a lot, right? Like, what's a kid to do?
So the source is like, why? Where's the energy coming from? And a lot of the default energy is mimetic energy. I'm going to do this because the people around me are doing this. Or prestige and status. I'm going to do this because it gives me this aura of prestige and status. And be conscious of what you're choosing. If you're going to do that because everyone else is doing it, then be honest with yourself. Are you going down this path because you really want the status and the prestige, but are you sure you want that?
Yeah.
Or are you following this thing inside of you that's like, yeah, I've got to do that? And it's this, I could describe the energy that brought me to this book. It's both subtle and overpowering at the same time, where it's not this logical, rational thing that's happening. I'm not like game planning this book, but every fiber of my being is telling me do that. That's the thing, and invest everything into that. And there's going to be some people who hear this who would be like, yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. And some people, for most of my life, I never had that experience. So I know like the teenage version of me would not have had that kind of experience before.
Sure.
But there is this experience of this overwhelming sense of I have to do this. And that's where a lot of the empty space comes into play, where we turn down all of the noise and all of the other things on status and the prestige and what's everyone else doing. Like, what am I feeling? What do my senses tell me? And how do I connect to me? And it's a lot of how I wrote the book and just how I write in general. It's, does this feel right to me? Does this feel real? And if not, then it's probably not the right path. It's probably not the right words, probably not the right whatever. But does it feel like me? And is this real for me? And part of why I say this was a spiritual experience for me. And I don't use that word often. I'm more likely to make fun of that word. But I think in this context, it's actually the right word, because I think the most literal sense of spirituality is listening to my spirit and trusting that this spirit inside of me, that this thing inside of me is going to guide me to where I need to go, and trusting that this thing that I can't fully rationally explain is going to take me to where I need to go. And that's an element of faith, and probably most radically surrender, where at a certain point in this book experience, I stopped getting worked up about all the specifics. I just began to trust that if I do what I need to do, then if I show up to the world the way I need to show up, then the world will show up for me. And I don't know how, but time and time again, that's been happening for these last 4 years.
Yeah.
Because this book started as a blank Google Doc. And since then, it's been this string of borderline like miracles and serendipities for everything to come together the way it has. And I'm like, okay, there's something going on.
Yeah.
If I walk my path, if I do what I know I need to do, then I have faith that things are going to unfold for me. And I don't know how. That's okay. Instead of trying to overly engineer the future, I'm just going to surrender and allow things to happen as they do and as they must. And I imagine the teenage version of myself could have heard that and be like, the hell is he talking about? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so much of these experiences aren't these top of mind, rational, logical things. There are these below conscious, visceral experiences of the mind, body, and soul. That is how I got this far.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at like these conversations that I get to have. There's something very calming. Like I feel very calm right now talking with you.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there's a lot of truth and honesty, like you seeking the truth, you being honest with your feelings, you even saying like, no, this is what risk means to me. And this is how I think people should see it, that. And it's an incredible experience to have this opportunity to talk with someone like yourself. And you had mentioned your teenage self, and I was thinking this before, and I've talked to, a lot of people say you have to go through these things, right? As young people at any age, right? Like you have to go through these hard times. You talk about Dante, right? You have to go through hell to get to this point.
Mm-hmm.
I heard someone else say this, and they came from a really tough upbringing. It's like, why would I have to go through that? There's all these people out here. There's all these books written. There's all these mentors that were trying to tell me.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? I think maybe both could be true. I'm not sure, but it sounds like for you that your teenage self and as you got older, you had to go through these things. Like you had to go home and live through that to say, what was that like to say, oh no, I have to do these? Like, do you see it that way? Or do you think like a 17-year-old could find you today and say, wow, I just learned a lot just from hearing him, diving into his book, taking some time and space. Like, what do you think of all that?
Yeah, it's both. The reason it's so useful to learn from other people's stories is if you see all these bad things happening to people for the same reasons, you're like, great, I know what not to do. Like it's great to learn from other people's mistakes and to embody other people's mistakes and lessons so you don't do that. It's like, oh, don't smoke cigarettes because you know where that takes you. Like,
Right.
You don't need to find out yourself. There's stuff like that. Like, you don't need to find out yourself. You can look at reality and other people and other people's experiences and be like, okay, that's all I need to know. But there's still a journey for you to go. And it's a much easier journey if you could avoid all the predictable traps. And that's largely what a lot of the book is looking at these patterns and traps that entrepreneurs fall in from all these different angles. And what lessons can we take from those stories? How can we put those stories and frames and lessons to our own lives so we don't make those same mistakes? But everyone still has their own journey to go through. And a lot of my journey has been confronting my own darkness, my own delusions, parts of myself that I wasn't fully connected to or understand. And I had to go through therapy about 1.5 years midway through this process, which was super useful for me because that gave me a lot of space to, in a safe way, confront my own darkness. That's a lot of the experience of psychedelics. But these are all different paths to largely get to the same place, which is confronting darkness and confronting the parts of ourselves that are begging to be heard. And darkness doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means the unseen, the unknown, and sometimes just confronting the unknown within our own emotions, within the gaps of knowledge that we have, our own delusions. Like so much of risk comes from the inability or the choice to not confront your own delusions about the world, about yourself. And what this book becomes, the deeper you get in, it's let's look at yourself.
Yeah.
And how do we look at the darkness in ourselves so we don't bring more darkness into the world via our delusions or ego?
Yeah. To get to this point, right, and to back up a bit, you go to Austin, start the company, Taco Street locating, apartments, Austin, Texas, massive growing. I'm in Charlotte. So I was around this weekend and you just see them. The skyscrapers are everywhere.
Yeah.
They're building apartments in mass, right? Charlotte's a similar type place, Nashville, cities in Florida, Vegas, right? All these different places. And you're also with Dallas and Houston, again, more growing cities. You obviously had a lot of success with Taco Street locating, with apartments, with the real estate market. Real estate market's been crazy, especially since COVID, which I think is when it was like, wait a second, I'm going to go under. And then you're like, wait a second, no, I'm doing really well.
Yeah.
That's the story there. Real estate's a fascinating. My wife's in the business. My father-in-law was in the business in different sides, commercial real estate, residential real estate, all over the place with it. And being in the city like Charlotte, you see it and then you just kind of pay attention to it. And we mentioned it before, interest rates are high, housing prices go crazy. Like what's happening here? College kids are coming out. You're like, where am I supposed to rent? Like this stuff is like $2,500 a month, $3,000 a month. So anyway, Taco Street locating, you just like started, like, what did you see there? I mean, you already told me that Austin, Texas was like this place, like there's this vibe there and I want to be a part of it. Like, what did you recognize to say, this is a niche like that you're like, I'm actually really good at this?
So none of that was really conscious.
Yeah. Okay.
There was like 3 or 4 years me being in Austin before I started Taco Street. Like I got a job in some fast growing tech startup and I'm like, this isn't it.
Yeah.
It was like entry level grunt work.
Sure.
And I'm like, nope, salaries, path, employment, nope, that's not it.
Yeah.
And then I spend more time just scrambling from side gig to side gig, just like most of the entire time, I'm just winging it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea where I'm going.
Yeah.
And I'm running out of money. And my mom convinces me to get a real estate license in Texas. And I really didn't want to be in real estate, but whatever, I'll do this.
Right.
Maybe it'll help me out. And along the way, I run out of money and I can't even pay rent. And I've had to ask my parents for rent money for like 3 straight months. And around that time, I just started doing this niche called apartment locating, which I thought was lame. It was really awful. I mean, I didn't really know what it was. All I knew was that I could make some money pretty quickly so that maybe I could do something else in a few months. And little did I know how big that niche was.
Yeah.
And how much money there was to be made. So I just stumbled into this business. And I worked under a broker for a few months. That is where I really started to make some money. And after that, I went rogue and then started Taco Street. Because then I saw there's hundreds of apartments and they're all paying good commissions and there's a giant market here. And I'm just a small fish in a giant pond. So I gotta make the best of this. And I wasn't so much trying to get rich. I was just trying to get as not poor as possible.
Right.
I was more running away from being broke
than
running towards being wealthy. But it's not an exciting niche. Like I help people find apartments to rent. I'm like an overpaid ambassador to the city, which is cool because I like the city.
Yeah, right.
But it's not complicated. It's not super fascinating. But there are some fundamentals about this industry that have kept me alive and doing fine during the pandemic, during high interest rates and high house prices and supply crunches. The pandemic was a blessing for me
Yeah.
because so many people moved to Austin that I was just making money left and right. And high interest rates, don't care. My clients rent apartments, they're not
Right.
buying houses. High home prices don't bother me.
Yeah. Actually helps you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I discovered that a lot of my safety comes from things I have no control over. Like, I don't control the interest rates or the prices of the market, but I do choose them. And I choose them consciously now. And being in this industry means I get the benefits of a world I don't control. Like being in the rental business, it gives me a lot of defensive, it's like a fortification against bad times,
Yeah.
which has been super useful when times have gotten bad for a lot of people and I'm just not affected.
Yeah.
But because I choose to continue doing this business for the time being, I'm choosing this set of risks and opportunities. And yeah, there's a lot of things that happening in my favor. Like, there's a lot of people in real estate that I'm like, ooh, that sounds tough.
Yeah.
Especially with the latest rulings about
Big deal.
commissions for
Yeah.
agents and class action lawsuits
Yeah.
and this and that. I'm like, great, don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal for me.
Right. Yeah.
And it's probably going to help me because now the business that I'm starting is apartment locating education, is showing people how to get into the business I've been doing
Yeah.
for the last 7 years. And I suspect this niche is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's going to be a lot of agents who are going to be pivoting out of what they're doing. It's something I call in the book a happy hour pivot.
Yeah.
It's not like this big grand pivot, like going from real estate to, I don't know, Instagram modeling. This is a very
Right.
actually, that's not a huge pivot.
That's right. We've seen that before.
The point is, it's not a huge pivot, like going from like home sales to apartment locating. It's actually a really minor shift,
Yeah.
but it radically changes.
It's a mindset shift.
Yeah. And it radically changes your relationship to your environment.
Hmm.
So one of the points I make in the book is you don't control your environment, but you do choose it.
Hmm.
And you could choose different environments by choosing different niches, by changing the way you do business. So when things get bad, like some people try to hunker down. Like the example I give in the book, it's Canadians. Like when things get really cold, Canadians can wear more clothes and eat poutine and play ice hockey, or they can go to Florida, which means they could adapt to their environment as it gets harder, or they could just change environments entirely. So that's one of the options that we have as entrepreneurs, is changing our environment, which is changing how we do business.
I want to talk offline about that. It's wild because I was saying, as we go around Charlotte and we look at all the apartments, we think of these cities, like that's my wife's niche, right? Like that's what she's fascinated by. Like if you find someone who's just like, what's going on here and what does this look like? And she loves looking at floor plans and understanding these different dynamics. Like that's an area, like, and as an entrepreneur, and she's got that entrepreneurial mindset, it's like, what exists out there? You would say, like, for now, this is my business. Like, it's interesting to learn about, if nothing else, right? I think that's a fascinating, like, I don't know what the shift will be because kids were coming out and you want to have a family and you want to buy a house. Well, less people are buying houses for different reasons. Well, what's going to be that American dream? Is it going to be buying a house? Like, I know people that say, no, I'd rather, instead of having a mortgage that's $5,000 a month, let's say, I'd rather pay $6,000 a month in rent and not have to worry about any of this crap. I don't have to do my landscaping. I don't have the bills. If my dishwasher breaks, I call someone up and they fix it, right? Like it's just a different lifestyle. And I think we might be shifting to that, which again speaks to goes to your business.
Yeah, they're just different choices.
Correct.
I bought my house and I live with strangers from the internet. And I made that choice.
Does that mean Airbnb or is that you share it? Okay.
I have like longer term people, but it's like in my house. I'm in my room and my roommates are in the other rooms. And that's the set of risks and opportunities that I chose.
Yeah.
The upside is I get a nice, valuable asset in my favorite neighborhood in Austin and the lifestyle that comes with. And the risk is living with people that I may or may not like.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at choosing those risks because I'm very deliberate
Right.
about how I bring people into my house, so that it's always been this like really cool combination of cool people that I live with.
Yeah.
And so it's worked out fine. I've just had to be very deliberate about these decisions that I make. So the downsides aren't that big of a deal, but the upsides are high and often surprisingly so.
Yeah. Man, this is good stuff. I could talk to you for hours. A couple more things I want to hit on.
Yeah.
On LinkedIn, you wrote, one of the most radical ideas in my book is that maybe you shouldn't try to scale your business. I've talked to some people about this, and it was liberating to hear. It's like, I think she's like a mom entrepreneur.
Uh-huh.
And then there's someone else who's like very similar. What if you don't want to scale your business? And then you say it like that. And obviously you talk about it in depth in your book. And I need this book. I can't wait to read this book. But anyway, that's a big topic, because so much in business, like those business books, it's like the E-Myth.
Yeah.
It's all these like, man, you got to scale your business. And it convinces you to go on this path. And then you get liberated by someone like yourself or these other individuals you talk to. Because I think of it that same way. Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah. So one very deliberate choice that I make about this book is I don't call it a business book. It's a book about humans who have businesses. And there's two very different reasons about that growth point. One is the practical reality that growth is a stress test. It's the ultimate stress test. Everything about your business is going to get stressed, from your marketing, your operations, your business model. Everything is going to get stressed when you add more, and you become more sensitive to your environment when you're a bigger business. It stress tests you, your competency, your ego, if things could work out well. It stress tests how much money you take from the business. It stress tests everything. Even like, yeah, sure, your business may be growing, but you're burning out. But what it really stresses is your relationship to your business. And that's where this book goes to a place I never even imagined it going. Because to me, the ultimate risk is your relationship to your business, and that it becomes one that you don't want. And a relationship is just an exchange of energy. And a positive relationship is where the return on energy is positive, and a bad relationship is where the return on energy is negative. And growing your business changes your relationship with it. And maybe growing gives you a better relationship to your business. Then great, grow. But if you grow your business, you have more employees, more overhead, more people to take care of, just more nonsense you have to take care of. And you're like, I actually kind of hate this.
Yeah.
Sure, you may even be more profitable. You may get more status and prestige from your peers, but inside you're miserable. Then are you really surviving? And I would argue no.
Yeah.
Because the ultimate irony of this book is maybe your business should die. And I think a lot of people are waiting for permission that it is okay to end their relationship to their business, whether that means selling it or even shutting it down.
Yeah.
Because the point isn't about your business surviving. It goes back, this is a human book. It's about you, the entrepreneur, the person that makes things, the person that does cool things, the person that solves problems and brings value to the world. That's what we're protecting to survive.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated when people shut something down. Successful, even. Like Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld says, it's over. I want to go do
Mhm.
something else. I'm like, because he could have kept going, right? He could have kept making millions and millions of
Yeah.
dollars. And yeah, I think, you see big companies shut down divisions of their company. You see, and they move on and they do something else. And I think I enjoy seeing that because I think it gives everyone permission to possibly do that, to consider it, to take the time and space.
Mhm.
And another word used, marinate on it and think through, like, because I remember starting the business and early on, I would get this question. I've said this before. They would ask me, how many employees do you have?
Mhm.
It's like, you go to the gym, you're like, how much do you bench? Like, who gives a shit? Like, what do you
Yeah.
care? How many employees I have and what does that mean? And like, it's super weird. And it would happen a lot.
Well, it's not weird because it's a status question.
Right.
And we are status oriented and conscious chimps, basically.
Yeah.
And that's not like deliberately what they're asking,
Yeah.
but it's like a semi-conscious question.
Right.
But it's like, it's really about like, how much money do you make? What's your status? What's the value of this relationship?
Right. Ooh.
There's some conscious motives, some unconscious motives.
Right.
It might just be curiosity.
For sure.
That
Yeah.
could be too.
Yep.
But yeah, it's one of those subtle signals reality gives you that I think guides a lot of people to places they didn't want to go. Because it's like the same way I was going through the motions of getting the right grades at the right school for the right degrees, looking at the right jobs.
Yeah.
It's this prestige game.
Yeah.
And no one really wins that because it's never enough.
Yeah.
It's just this never ending treadmill of status and prestige. And it just goes nowhere.
Yeah.
And like, what game do you want to play? Like, one of my favorite quotes is from Naval Ravikant is play stupid games, play stupid prizes. So what I've connected to now consciously is the only game I'm going to win is my own game.
Yep. Taylor Swift also had that in one of her songs. I know that because I got 2 girls. And I remember talking about it with my daughter, and when Naval said it, I love it. Yeah, because it's so true. And man, I love this. It's uncertainty exposure, right? Everything that you're talking about. I thought about this podcast. Like, someone says, oh, you should have a podcast. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm going to have a microphone and people are going to listen to what I have to say. Like, that's ridiculous. This is some years ago. So you start doing it and then you start showing up. And as I mentioned before, then you start having these conversations and meet these incredible people. But it's uncertainty. Like, who am I going to be talking to? What questions am I going to ask? And then it goes on, right? And then I talked to you before about going to London and Paris. And one of my favorite things to do with my daughter, for example, in London, is to get on the tube and have absolutely no idea how this works. Not only like, how does it work? Like, how do you pay for it?
Yeah.
When you get on it, are you on the right train? Where are you going to end up? When you get off, where are you going to end up? Like, and there's people just coming and going every direction. And you're just like, and then you figure it out. And then you have this confidence. And then to do that with your kid and to watch her do it. And I'm like, wow, I'm glad she's here because she's getting me through a lot of these things. And I'm like, man, that's more than you can learn in a classroom. If you can figure out how to get from here to there and do it with confidence. And even if you get lost, so what? Because maybe you stumble upon something that like, oh, wow, that was really cool. We didn't expect to see that. Like you talk about, like in Italy, you go in Venice or Florence and you get lost on those like little side streets. Like that's the best part about it. And that exposure to uncertainty, like it's not easy. Sometimes it's not easy for me. But like, I've always thought like if my kid's going to a new school, you're showing up that first day, you don't know where lunch is. You don't know who you're sitting next to. You don't know how you're walking from here to there. If you go to college and business or whatever that might be, those uncertainty experiences, that's what makes it. Doesn't mean it's going to work out, right?
Yeah.
But hearing you talk about it and then having the opportunity to talk with you, like that's everything.
Yeah, no, it goes back to romance.
Yeah.
Which is, in this case, there's a romance to the unknown and having excitement towards it. So much of my life right now is a product of me choosing the unknown over the known. And there's still a lot of order and predictability and stability in how I operate, but I always make sure there's a lot of uncertainty in safe ways, in like events that I go to, the gym that I go to. I put myself in positions where there's a lot of asymmetric but positive uncertainty. So it's largely a position thing, but it's also a choice. Where I'm choosing to go from this gym where everything's predictable and nothing unpredictable is going to happen, to moving to a gym where every day I go, I run into someone that I know and like, or make new friends, or build new relationships, or going to this event versus that event. And one event is the known event where everything is kind of predictable. There's going to be no uncertainty. Then there's the event where there's a lot more uncertainty. And there's this exercise of romancing that uncertainty, believing that there's a possibility in that unknown. There could be really something really awesome in that unknown. And let's see what's going on.
Yeah. Survival First book comes out April 8th. Taco Street Locating, still going strong in Austin, Houston, and Dallas. Where can people learn about you, your company, your book, all that?
Yeah, so the book is at survivalfirstbook.com. It's going to be in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, audio. If you like my voice, got 9 hours of me talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, the business is tacostreetlocating.com. I think it's a fun website for people who want to learn branding and positioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all the interesting stuff.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, by the way, because most real estate websites you go to, most real estate agents, companies, it's just dry. It's more, you don't get anything from it. You need, I don't know, man. It just looks cool. At first I was like, I don't know, when the request came through, I'm like, oh, what does he do? Is he selling food or whatever? And obviously you're into food too. You talked about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something to it and it's interesting. So Alexander, man, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I can't wait to read your book. And I hope we can stay in touch and learn more. We will, after this, talk for a couple minutes, if that's okay. And man, thank you. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, thank you.
In case you haven't noticed, we love podcasts. In fact, we love building podcasts, everything from development to production. Because of all that, we're building a one-of-a-kind podcast network. If you have a podcast or looking to launch a new podcast, then we should talk. You can message me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz or hit us up any way that works for you. Let's talk about your podcast joining this one-of-a-kind podcast network.